This story is one that's almost too wild to believe. It's filled with twists, heartbreak, and revelations so dramatic it could easily be turned into a blockbuster movie. For more than 30 years, I thought I had a happy marriage. My wife, Isabel, and I raised 3 wonderful children together, and we owned a small gas station and convenience store. While we weren't wealthy, we made a comfortable living and led what I believed was a fulfilling life. A few years ago, everything changed. Our 28-year-old son, Brian, was rushed to the hospital with severe kidney issues. Brian is married with 2 kids of his own, and the thought of losing him was devastating for both Isabel and me. The doctors warned us that if his condition didn't improve, he might need a kidney transplant. They suggested we begin exploring potential donors within the family. Without mentioning it to Isabel, I decided to get tested to see if I could be a match for my son. The results left me stunned. I wasn't a compatible donor. Confused, I demanded an explanation from the doctor. How could I not be a match for my own son? The doctor, visibly uncomfortable, asked me to step into his office. "Mr. Harper," he said cautiously, "the test results indicate that Brian isn't biologically your son. We'll run the test again to confirm, but this is highly unusual." I felt the world tilt on its axis. How could this be possible? Questions swirled in my mind. If Brian wasn't mine, what about my daughters Julia and Mia? Could this all be some sort of mistake? 2 days later, the doctors brought us some relief. Brian's kidneys were improving, and he wouldn't require a transplant after all. Tears of joy flowed freely as our family celebrated the good news. Despite the relief, I couldn't shake what I'd learned. Unable to confide in Isabel yet, I decided to request DNA samples from everyone in the family, under the pretense that it was for medical purposes in case of future emergencies. Isabel seemed nervous about the idea, but she agreed, as did Julia and Mia. I also gathered samples from other family members for further analysis. A few days later, the hospital confirmed what I had feared. Brian wasn't biologically my child. Desperate for clarity, I asked the lab to test Julia and Mia as well. "Mr. Harper," I told the technician, "I need to know if either of my daughters is biologically mine. This is my family. We need the truth." Brian was discharged from the hospital shortly afterward, and within a week, he was healthy enough to return to work. Everyone was thrilled by his recovery, but I struggled to maintain my composure. The unanswered questions gnawed at me, making it hard to sleep or focus on anything else. Isabel noticed my distant behavior and started pressing me for answers. Night after night, she'd ask me what was on my mind, and I'd vaguely reply that I was just worried about the kids, which was true, though not in the way she thought. One evening, I returned home to find Isabel sitting at the kitchen table, clutching a stack of papers from the hospital. Tears streamed down her face as she confronted me. "When did you do this? Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded. "I got tested to see if I could donate a kidney to Brian," I admitted. "The doctor told me I'm not his biological father, so I had the girls tested too." Her sobbing intensified. "Julia isn't yours either," she choked out, "but Mia is." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. After 3 decades of marriage, I had just discovered that 2 of my children weren't mine. "We need to talk, Isabel," I said, trying to stay calm. "Maybe we can work through this, or maybe we can't. But this changes everything." "Dave," she pleaded, "this happened so long ago. Can't we just leave it in the past? It's been over 28 years. "No, Izzy. We can't just sweep this under the rug. You had an affair. I need to know who you were sleeping with. Who have I been raising all these years?" Julia and Brian were full siblings, so this wasn't some one-time mistake. Her voice cracked as she finally confessed. "It was Henry. It was stupid and wrong, but it's over." "Henry? Henry, our best friend? The man who died 25 years ago? Did Maggie know? Were you 2 having some twisted arrangement?" "Please, Dave," she begged. "Let's not dig up the past. I love you. That was a lifetime ago. Can't we move forward?" "Move forward?" I shot back. "Are you out of your mind? We got married, and within a year, you started sleeping with Henry? I raised his children as my own. If he hadn't died, you'd probably still be with him. Tell me the truth." Isabel dissolved into tears, her words tumbling out in broken fragments. "Henry and I, we were friends. I loved him, but he loved Maggie. I thought I'd moved on when I married you, but when you were gone, he'd visit, and it just happened. After I got pregnant with Brian, he asked if the baby was his. I told him I didn't know and that I wouldn't tell you unless he left Maggie for me. He laughed and said you could raise his child for him. I felt sick. You expect me to believe this was some accident? That it just happened? What about Julia? Did the same thing just happen again? She hesitated, the weight of another confession visibly crushing her. I told him to stay away unless Maggie was with him, she admitted. But one day she paused, struggling to continue. He forced himself on. After Isabel's shocking confession about Henry, she continued her story. He threatened me, Dave. He said if I didn't let him have his way, he'd tell you about Brian. After Julia was born, he even mocked me, saying he hoped he'd gotten me pregnant again. I couldn't bear to tell you. I didn't want to lose you. When Henry died in that car crash, I felt both grief and relief. Finally, I could move on and focus on our marriage. Over time, I fell deeper in love with you. We built a good life together, didn't we? I shook my head, barely able to look at her. Good life? Our entire marriage was a lie. You married me while secretly loving another man. You had his children and kept it hidden all these years. Now you want me to just forget everything? No, Isabel. I can't do that. I'm going to see a lawyer and file for divorce. She started crying again. Dave, no. What about our children? What will you tell them? That's for you to decide, I said coldly. You have 1 week to tell me the full story. After that, I'll tell them the truth myself. And just so you know, I don't believe your version of events. If Henry were still alive, you'd probably still be sneaking around with him. You're being cruel, she whispered. No, irrably sharply. I'm being honest. I've spent 30 years with someone I don't even know. I'm moving into the guest room. Don't expect me to play along with your lies anymore. 2 days later, I received a phone call from the gas station. Isabel's car had crashed after speeding through a curve and failing to make the turn. She died instantly. The sheriff asked if there were any issues that might explain her erratic driving. I kept quiet, telling him there were no problems at home. The death was ruled an accident, pending an autopsy. Breaking the news to our children was the hardest thing I've ever done. Seeing their grief made me question everything. Was this truly an accident? Or had the weight of her secrets pushed Isabel to the edge? Days later, the autopsy confirmed it. The crash was a tragic accident. At her funeral, I mourned deeply despite everything. 3 decades of marriage couldn't be erased overnight. I chose to keep her affair and the truth about Brian and Julia a secret from our children. Afterward, I asked Julia, Mia, and Brian's wife to divide Isabel's belongings. I kept only a few family photos, clinging to the memories of happier times. 2 years later, just before the holidays, I found myself alone again. Brian and Julia now lived over 100 miles away, and I only visited them occasionally. Mia, now a senior in college, was planning a trip to England with her friends over the holidays. She worried about me being alone, but I assured her I was fine. I spent most of my days at the gas station, surrounded by customers and coworkers. I wasn't truly alone, but the emptiness lingered. One day, while watching TV, I saw a commercial encouraging donations to help children in third-world countries. It got me thinking about how much charity truly reaches the people in need. The next day, I visited Pastor Jim at the local church and asked if they had a Christmas campaign to support struggling families. Yes, Dave, he replied. We do. Do you have a family in mind? No, I said, but I'd like the name of a family I can help. Pastor Jim suggested a young widow named Carmen Wilson. She had 3 kids and had recently moved to town after her husband was murdered. He explained she was working hard to start fresh. I thanked him and decided to visit Joe's Diner, where Carmen worked as a waitress. At the diner, I spotted Carmen right away. She looked to be in her early 30s, with shoulder-length dark hair and a kind but weary smile. She wasn't overly thin or heavy, just a pleasant, natural-looking woman. When she came over to my table, I said, just a cup of coffee and maybe some conversation if you don't mind. She raised an eyebrow. Coffee, sure. Conversation? We'll see. I'm not great at talking to women, I admitted, trying to ease the tension. This isn't a flirtation, I promise. I picked your name off the church tree. I want to be your friend this holiday season. Carmen hesitated, then walked over to Joe. After a brief exchange, she returned with my coffee. Joe says you're okay. So, what do you mean by holiday friend? The church didn't mention this. This was my idea, I explained. If you're uncomfortable, I'll just buy gifts for your kids. I just want to help one family this season, and I chose yours. Her eyes welled up with tears. Are you serious? I've been so worried about my kids this year. You know my husband. I know, Carmen, I said gently. He was murdered. Let me help. If this feels like too much, just say so. Why are you doing this? She asked. Don't you have your own family to look after? My wife died 2 years ago in a car accident, I said. My children are grown and doing well. The holidays have been lonely for me, and I'd like to make someone else's holiday a little brighter. Carmen smiled faintly. For the sake of my kids, I'll say yes. But please, no tricks. We've been through enough. The following weekend, I visited Carmen's home. It was a modest apartment in a housing project. The furniture was old, the TV barely worked, and the neighborhood wasn't ideal. Her 8-year-old son, Mike, greeted me at the door with a big grin. Are you the pizza guy? He asked excitedly. I laughed. Close enough. Your mom invited me. As I entered, Carmen introduced me to her children. Mike, 8, Mark, 6, and Molly, 4. They were lively, sweet kids who didn't hide their excitement over the pizza. Molly declared, I'm very smart. I go to kindergarten. Her pride made me smile. While the kids ate and watched cartoons, I asked Carmen about her family's needs. I wasn't prepared for this, she admitted. We get by, but the kids dream of things I can't afford. Bikes, a better TV. Anything would mean a lot. Let's start small, I said. How about taking the kids to a movie this weekend? There's a new Harry Potter out. Mike's face lit up. Really, Mom? Can we go? Maybe if you behave this week, she teased. By the time I left that evening, the kids were grinning, Carmen was smiling, and I felt a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. As the conversation continued, Carmen offered, I'll talk to the kids and figure out what we could do to repay your kindness, Dan. Maybe I can make you a home-cooked meal or something special. Carmen, I do this because it brings me happiness, I replied sincerely. Seeing the kids' smiles is payment enough, and your smile is just a wonderful bonus. Please don't feel like you owe me anything. Carmen blushed slightly, looking away. You're too kind, she murmured. Later that weekend, Manny came home from college for a visit. While we were catching up, she asked, So, Dad, what's new? I told her about Carmen and how I'd been helping her family through the holidays. Mandy's brow furrowed. Dad, are you sure this is a good idea? You barely know her. Honey, helping Carmen and her kids has given me a renewed sense of purpose. I'd love for you to meet them and share your honest thoughts. She sighed. I don't know, Dad. This makes me uneasy. Isn't she living in a rough area? Isn't that risky for a single mom with kids? Exactly why I want to help them, I explained. You're grown now, Mandy. You don't need me as much as you used to. I feel like it's time for me to help someone else. Reluctantly, Mandy agreed to meet them. All right, Dad. I'll meet them on Saturday, but I'm not promising anything. That weekend, I invited Carmen and her kids over for a barbecue. Despite the chilly weather, I decided grilling would be fun. Carmen arrived in her old beat-up car, and as she unbuckled the kids, Mandy whispered sarcastically, Nice car, Dad. What would you say if she drove up in a brand-new car instead? I teased. Touché, Dad, she admitted with a smirk. Mike and Mark ran up to me immediately, full of excitement. Eh? Unpladan? Wow, you live here? This house is huge. I introduced them to Mandy as Carmen helped Molly out of the car. Mark, this is my daughter, Mandy, I said. Hi, boys. Nice to meet you. Mandy greeted warmly. Mike piped up. I'm Mike, and I'm 8. Mark is 6, and that's our sister, Molly. Molly walked up to me confidently, and I scooped her into my arms. Mandy observed us closely. Molly is my little buddy, I said with a grin. She can hold her own against her brothers, just like you used to, Mandy. Carmen approached and smiled warmly. Mandy, it's lovely to meet you. I know this situation is a little unusual, and you probably have questions. Let's just enjoy today, and I'll try to answer them as we go. Your father is one of the kindest people I've ever met. Mandy's skeptical expression softened, and she smiled back. I like her already, Dad. The kids excitedly explored the house, marveling at the TV and everything else. Meanwhile, Carmen and Mandy bonded in the kitchen. Carmen joked, "Men think grilling is the entire meal, but we know better." Later, I took Mike and Mark to the store to pick out some DVDs, leaving Molly behind to help her mom and Mandy in the kitchen. Molly, in her adorable way, declared, "Uncle Dan, take the boys and go ahead. We girls have to stick together." At the store, I picked out The Little Mermaid for Molly. When we returned, she squealed with joy and made it clear the boys could only watch it with her if they were quiet. Thanksgiving plans quickly fell into place. Carmen and Mandy volunteered to handle the cooking, while I agreed to keep the kids entertained. The hot tub in the backyard, despite the chilly weather, became a highlight. Mandy reached out to Brian and Julia, inviting them and their families to join us for the holiday. In the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, I spent more time with Carmen and the kids. I'd often stop by Joe's Diner for lunch, leaving generous tips. Carmen playfully scolded me. "Dan, you don't need to spoil me or the kids like this." "It makes me happy," I replied simply. Seeing their smiles is worth every penny. Thanksgiving Day. Carmen and her kids arrived early that morning. She looked stunning in a simple, modest outfit. Mandy, already in the kitchen, greeted them warmly. Mandy had also invited her boyfriend, Ross, a paramedic still in school. They were planning to travel to England for a hospital project right after the holidays. Brian and his wife, Gail, arrived next with their kids. After hugs and greetings, the children immediately asked about the hot tub. I introduced them to Carmen and her children, and they hit it off quickly. Gail offered to help in the kitchen, while Brian stayed with me, trying to assess the new dynamics. Janice and her husband, Rob, arrived soon after, with their kids joining the others in the basement. Rob gave me a knowing look when he met Carmen. "Dad, she seems really nice," he said quietly. "Rob, she's a good person, and she deserves help," I replied. As the day unfolded, everyone got along wonderfully. Carmen's kids bonded easily with my grandchildren, and Molly's sweet nature won everyone over. After dinner, as the kids rotated through the hot tub, the adults gathered in the living room. Carmen sat beside me, helping keep the kids in check. Mandy's boyfriend, Ross, took the opportunity to pull me aside. "Mr. Weller," he began, "I love Mandy, and I plan to propose during our trip to London. Do I have your blessing?" "Ross, you don't need my permission. Mandy's capable of making her own decisions. But if you're looking for my blessing, you absolutely have it," I said, smiling. As the evening wound down, Carmen gathered her kids to leave. Before she went, she turned to me and said, "Dan, thank you for today. It's been wonderful. I really like spending time with your family." The warmth in her words and the sincerity in her smile left me thinking about Mandy's earlier observation. Maybe Carmen really did feel something for me. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to feel something for her too. That night, something unexpected happened. As we stood near the car, saying our goodbyes, I leaned in and kissed Carmen. It was a gentle, lingering kiss, and when we finally pulled apart, there were tears in her eyes. "You didn't have to do that, Dan," she whispered, her voice trembling. I have to go." Before I could respond, she quickly gathered the kids, who called out their goodbyes as they got into the car. I walked up to her window, feeling a mix of regret and uncertainty. "Carmen, I'm sorry. I stepped out of line. Please forgive me." Her eyes softened, and she said, "The problem is, Dan, I've wanted you to do that for so long." With that, she drove away, leaving me standing there, conflicted and worried about what I had just done. The following days were nerve-wracking. Carmen didn't call, and I didn't want to push her. On Monday, I went to Joe's Diner to see her, but Joe informed me that she had taken the morning off to handle daycare arrangements for Molly. I planned to return during lunch, but work obligations pulled me away. That evening, my phone rang. It was Carmen, her voice shaky and filled with distress. "Dan, I'm so sorry to bother you, but our apartment was broken into. They took everything, even the old TV. All we have left are our clothes. I don't know what to do." I could hear her holding back tears. "Carmen, pack whatever you can. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Everything will be fine, I promise." "Thank you, Dan." I didn't know who else to call, she said, her voice breaking. I arrived at her apartment to find her and the kids huddled together. Molly was crying, clearly scared by what had happened. I knelt beside her, reassuring her that everything was going to be okay. Carmen looked at me, surprised as I said, "You're coming to my house. Pack your things, and we'll leave now." "I thought you'd take us to a motel for the night," she said hesitantly. "No, you're staying with me. Pack your car and take mine with the kids." "I'll drive yours," I instructed gently. She didn't argue, trusting me completely. I spoke briefly with the police officer taking the report, giving him my contact information and explaining the situation. He warned that recovering anything stolen would be unlikely. Together, we got her car running, and we headed to my house. When we arrived, Carmen and the kids were waiting on the porch. "The door is open," I said. "Why didn't you go in?" "You weren't here," Carmen replied, "and I didn't want to just walk in." "Come on, boys," I called. "Help me with the bags. Mark, take your things to the room with the bunk beds. Put Molly's and your mom's stuff in the front bedroom. If you're unsure, leave it in the living room." As the boys scrambled to carry their belongings, I turned to Carmen. "We need to talk," I said quietly. Molly interrupted, tugging on her mom's hand. "Mommy, can I help the boys organize?" Carmen smiled at her. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Once the kids were busy, Carmen hesitated. "Dan, we can't stay here. What will your kids think?" "You need help right now," I replied firmly. "This arrangement doesn't have to be permanent. Let's just take it one day at a time. You and Molly can share the front bedroom, and the boys will be comfortable upstairs." Carmen sighed. "But the kids have school, and I have work. This will interfere with everything." "We'll make it work," I assured her. "I can help with drop-offs and pickups. Call the schools and explain the situation. Give them my name if needed. We'll figure it out." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Dan, I care about you more than you realize. I'm not good at hiding it, and I don't want to anymore. Your kids already know how I feel." "Carmen," I said gently, "let me handle my kids. Right now, your priority is settling in and getting the kids comfortable. And just so you know, I don't regret kissing you." As we worked together to unpack and settle everyone in, I made dinner with the boys while Carmen helped Molly organize her room. The meal was simple, hot dogs and macaroni and cheese, but the kids were thrilled. During dinner, Carmen asked about house rules. "We'll establish rules as we go," I explained. "For now, the kids need to ask for permission before doing anything. My office and bedroom are off limits without an invitation. The pool is closed, but the hot tub can be used with supervision. Most importantly, they need to keep their rooms tidy." Carmen chuckled. "Well, good luck with that last one. My boys aren't exactly neat freaks." Looking at the kids, including Molly, who was beaming at me, I said, "This is your home now. Have fun, but listen to your mom. If she says no, don't come asking me, and vice versa." Molly raised her hand, making me laugh. "What is it, honey? Are we allowed to play with the toys in the basement?" she asked innocently. "Of course," I said. "And don't worry, Santa might bring you some of your own this Christmas." Molly grinned. "Thanks, Uncle Dan." She quickly ran downstairs, followed by her brothers. Carmen hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Dan." "Thank you." Later that evening, as the kids got ready for bed, Carmen and I checked on their rooms. An argument had broken out between Mike and Mark about who would sleep on the top bunk. Carmen intervened calmly, suggesting they take turns each month. Her approach impressed me, and the boys quickly agreed to the compromise. After everyone settled in, Carmen thanked me again. "Good night, Dan, and thanks for everything." I smiled, unable to resist complimenting her. "Is there anything you don't look amazing in?" She laughed softly, her damp hair framing her face, and headed to bed. The next morning was hectic but manageable. Carmen updated the schools and daycare about the temporary arrangement, and I called Joe to let him know Carmen might be late for work. Joe, married for over 40 years, expressed concern for her well-being. "Are you serious about this, Dan? She's been through a lot." "I would never hurt her, Joe. She and her kids are safe with me," I reassured him. That evening, we returned to Carmen's apartment to gather the rest of her belongings. There wasn't much to take, but it felt like a fresh start. On the way back, Mandy called. After Carmen explained the situation, Mandy asked to speak with me. Dad, are you sure about this? She asked. You know she loves you, right? Mandy, what should I have done? Just give her money and tell her to figure it out? I care about her. We're adults, and we haven't done anything wrong. Mandy sighed. I like Carmen as a sister, but you two need to be careful. Just think it through. As we brought the last of Carmen's belongings inside, Mandy had called to check in. After I handed the phone back to Carmen, I asked, what did she want? She's just worried about us, Carmen replied, looking thoughtful. She said she knows how much I care about you. I told her that myself. And what's there to worry about? We're adults, Carmen. I'm in my 50s. I can make my own decisions, I said with a reassuring smile. I tried to explain that I'm grateful for everything you've done for me and the kids, but my feelings for you go beyond gratitude, Dan. They're real, and I won't deny them. Mandy's just concerned one of us might get hurt. We'll take it one day at a time, I said. Maybe time will help everyone adjust. Just then, Mike and Mark burst into the room. Uncle Dan, can we go in the hot tub? They asked excitedly. I turned to Carmen and smirked. Only if your mom joins you. You can't go in alone. Come on, Mom, please. It's warm and has bubbles, the boys begged. Carmen sighed, then smiled. Okay, boys, get your swimsuits. Molly, grab yours too, and I'll be right there. As she walked past me, she teased, You set me up, didn't you? I grinned. Maybe, but I bet you'll have fun. Later, Carmen emerged in a simple but flattering two-piece swimsuit. Happy now? She asked playfully as she strolled by. You look incredible, I said, unable to resist. I'm willing to bet you'd look stunning even without. Creep, she interjected with a laugh, heading to the hot tub with the kids. As she settled into the water, her beauty and confidence struck me once again. Handing her a drink, I said, I told you the water would feel great. It really does, she said, relaxing. My body needed this. Thanks for everything, Dan. Later, as everyone got ready for bed, Molly peeked into my office, smiling and waiting for permission to enter. No one can say no to this little girl, or her mom, I thought, motioning for her to come in. She climbed into my lap, wrapped her tiny arms around my neck, and kissed my cheek. Guniget, unpledan. See you in the morning. Good night, sweetheart, I said softly. The next day, Carmen called from work. Her car wouldn't start again, which was frustrating for both of us. I took my tow truck to the diner, where two men were already offering to help her hook up the battery. It was clear they were flirting. Carmen waved them off, saying, No thanks, my friend is coming. When I arrived, the men backed off quickly. Thanks, but I'll take it from here, I said, giving them a polite but firm nod. They left nervously. After hooking up her car, Carmen climbed into the truck. As she adjusted her dress, showing just a hint of leg, she said, Thanks for coming, Dan. I didn't know who else to call. I told you I'd always be here for you, I replied. Are you upset that someone else offered to help you? Yes and no, I admitted. I want people to see how amazing you are, but I hate it when they hit on you. I didn't do anything wrong, Daniel, she said, her tone defensive but understanding. I know. I was just answering your question. Besides, I don't own you, I said, trying to ease the tension. But you told those guys I was your fiancé, she pointed out, raising an eyebrow. I didn't answer. Instead, I drove to a nearby junkyard. Why are we here, Dan? She asked, confused. I'll give you a few hundred for that car, I said. Get your personal stuff out, and we'll sort it later. What am I supposed to drive? She asked, exasperated. We'll talk later, I replied. We need to hurry and get the kids. After trading in her old car, I brought her to my house and opened the garage. You'll drive this, I said, motioning to a practically new car with just 8,000 miles on it. It's yours. Dan, I can't just take this car. How much do you want for it? Just drive it. You need something reliable, and this is a good car. I'll keep it in my name and cover the insurance. It'll save you money. What if we don't stay together? What if I move? She asked hesitantly. Are you thinking of moving? I asked, concerned. No, but I was just wondering, what would happen if you kicked us out? Her voice cracked with emotion. Carmen, I'd never do that. You'll always have a car, and you'll always have my support, I said firmly. Her eyes filled with tears as she kissed me softly. Molly, standing nearby, exclaimed, Mom just kissed Uncle Dan. It was a thank you kiss, Carmen explained quickly. No, it's your mom's car now, I said with a grin. She kissed me because I gave her the car. Carmen kissed me again, smiling. Okay, everyone, time for dinner. Should I cook? Or should we take the new car to McDonald's? McDonald's, the kids shouted in unison. Family confrontation. Later that week, while Carmen was at work, my kids, Brian, Janice, and Mandy, came to the store. Dad, we need to talk. Can we go to your house for a bit? Brian asked. When I got home, they were waiting in the living room, their expressions serious. This is about Carmen, isn't it? I said, sitting down. Dad, Brian began. One day you're helping her, and the next she's living here with her kids. Now your car is gone. Did you give it to her? As my kids, I'll explain, but I have to say, I'm disappointed in all of you. Dad, Brian said, Carmen's a good person, but we're worried she's taking advantage of you. You're lonely, and she fills that void. Mandy cut in, that's crap, Brian. Carmen loves Dad, and he loves her. I support them. I care about Carmen and her kids, I said firmly. And no, we haven't been intimate. Not that it's any of your business. I'm thinking about asking her to marry me. What? Brian exclaimed. You hardly know her. She has so much baggage, Dad. Listen, I said calmly. I have a big house, and I found someone who cares about me just as much as I care about her. Why are you against that? Brian hesitated. It's not just her. Do you really want to start over, raising 3 young kids who aren't even yours? Brian, I said, it's not biology that makes a family. It's love. And in case you've forgotten, I've raised children who weren't biologically mine before. What do you mean? Janice asked, her face pale. I handed them the DNA test results. I've always been your father, but you deserve to know the truth. As we carried on with our lives, happiness seemed to find its way back into our family. I reflected on the past and began explaining the truth to my children, starting with the one question I knew Brad needed answered. Dad, if you knew you weren't my biological father, why did you take the kidney test? Brad asked, his voice trembling with emotion. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. Brad, you've always been my son in every way that matters. If it meant saving your life, I would have given you my kidney without hesitation. Janice chimed in. Dad, did you know the truth before Brad went to the hospital? I did. Your mom told me after Harvey passed. I explained. She admitted you and Brad were his children. I was shocked, of course, but we talked it through and decided to stay together. I loved you both as my own from the moment you were born. Then Mandy came along, and we became a true family. Your mom was a wonderful wife and mother, and we lived happily until her accident. Brad's eyes glistened with tears. I'm sorry, Dad. I was thinking more about us than about you and Carmen. Brad, I said gently, in situations like this, people often worry about inheritance or what they might lose. I need you to know that you, Janice, and Mandy will always be in my will. But what disappoints me is how little compassion you've shown for Carmen and her children. They're good kids, Brad. They deserve kindness. Janice hugged me tightly, her voice shaky. I don't care about DNA tests. You'll always be my father. Nothing changes that. I hugged her back, tears threatening to spill over. Just as I released her, Carmen pulled up in the driveway. Well, I said, wiping my face, looks like we're all going out to dinner, unless you want to tell Carmen why you're here. Mandy quickly interjected. It's my last day off from school, so we decided to have dinner together. Carmen stepped inside, her warm smile lighting up the room. Hi, everyone. What's the occasion? I just need to change out of my uniform, she added, gesturing toward her waitress attire. Kids, why don't you talk to Mandy while I get ready? The kids eagerly greeted Carmen, and Molly ran to Brad, hugging his leg. Brad, I like you. Brad glanced at me, realizing the depth of what I'd been saying. As the kids chatted and excitement filled the air, Carmen emerged from her room, ready for dinner. Let's go, everyone, she said cheerfully. Uncle Dan's driving. Christmas joy. The weeks leading up to Christmas flew by. Mandy asked if I could babysit while she and Carmen went Christmas shopping. I happily agreed and even gave them a list of items to pick up for me. I wanted to surprise the kids with bikes, something they could enjoy in our safe neighborhood. While they shopped, I took the kids to visit Santa. I handed each child $20 and said, "This is for your mom's gift. Keep it safe and use it only for something she'll love." The kids took their mission seriously. Mike found a stuffed unicorn that he said Mom would love. Mark picked out Titanic and Shrek, knowing they were her favorite movies. Molly, however, struggled to find something special. She whispered to the saleswoman, "I want something that smells like my mom." The saleswoman suggested White Diamond's perfume, and I discreetly covered the cost difference so Molly could proudly buy it with her $20. We returned home and hid the gifts in my office, eagerly awaiting Christmas morning. Mandy's excitement grew as she prepared for her upcoming trip to England. The kids even surprised her with a new luggage set they picked out, leaving it on her bed with a sweet card signed by all three of them. Christmas morning was magical. The kids woke up to presents under the tree and stockings filled with small surprises. Watching their joy as they opened their gifts was heartwarming. Carmen beamed as she unwrapped her children's thoughtful presents: the unicorn, the movies, and the perfume. She teared up when she saw the $50 price tag on the perfume and realized Molly had just enough money to buy it. I had a few surprises for Carmen as well, including a gift certificate and a bright red nightgown. But the biggest surprise was the small box I handed her toward the end of the morning. As she opened it, tears filled her eyes. It was an engagement ring. "Carmen," I said, taking her hand, "will you marry me? I love you and want to spend the rest of my life with you and the kids." She looked at me with a mix of love and sadness. "Dan, I love you too, but the answer is no, at least for now." "Please hear me out," she said, her voice steady. "We've only known each other for a few months. Let's take our time and make sure this is what we both truly want." I nodded, understanding her hesitation. "Okay, Carmen, I'll wait as long as it takes. I just want you to know how much you mean to me." She kissed me softly and added with a playful smile, "But I'm keeping the nightgown, a wedding surprise." As the months passed, life with Carmen and the kids felt more natural. We functioned as a family, sharing responsibilities and building a life together. When Mandy's wedding approached, Carmen was honored to be her maid of honor. The wedding day was a whirlwind of emotions, joy, and love. During the reception, as the bouquet toss began, Brad nudged Carmen toward the group of single women. Mandy's bouquet landed directly in her hands, drawing cheers from the crowd. Then came the garter toss. Ross handed it to me with a wink, saying, "This belongs to my father-in-law." The crowd watched curiously as I knelt before Carmen. Sliding the garter up her leg, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the engagement ring. "Carmen," I said, my voice full of emotion, "it's been 6 months since I first proposed to you. Surrounded by our family and friends, I'm asking again, will you marry me?" The room fell silent, everyone holding their breath. Molly, unable to contain herself, stepped forward. "Say yes, Mommy," she pleaded. Tears streamed down Carmen's face as she nodded. "Yes, Dan, I'll marry you." Cheers erupted, and Mandy embraced her new stepmother. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, including mine. Happily ever after, Carmen and I were married a few months later. She left her job at Joe's Diner to help me run the gas station and convenience store. Together, we created a home filled with love, laughter, and hope. Molly now calls me Daddy, and the boys alternate between Daddy and Uncle Dan, just to confuse their friends. As I sit on the couch with Carmen, watching the kids play, I'm overwhelmed by gratitude. Life didn't unfold the way I planned, but it brought me more love and joy than I ever imagined. This is our family now, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.